Good morning. This is the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. It is Wednesday, December 14th. This is our weekly business agenda. We will initiate our meeting with a roll call.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Ackerman, Commissioner Bogue, Commissioner Cross,
Present.
Commissioner McGowan,
Here.
Commissioner Mesner,
Here.
Commissioner Oath, Commissioner Robbins.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have 4 out of 7 commissioners present.
Great. And that is a quorum, and Commissioner Ackerman is excused with permission. So he's not here today, and that's fine. We will start with an adjustment to our agenda. We had 6 matters on the consent agenda, 3 whiting spacing matters, 1 PDC exception location, and 2 Karis variance requests. The variance requests are items 2108-00139 and 2109-00148. They are under Group C, and I would like to pull them from the agenda. They were late additions, and I do not believe the commissioners have had sufficient time to be able to analyze them. And so I would ask Hearings Manager Larson that they be pulled from the agenda and placed on our next agenda docket, which is January 4th.
Certainly, Mr. Chair, we will do that, and apologies for the late addition of those matters.
Not a problem. We're all working hard. Things happen. I just want, in particular with regard to variances, to ensure that the commission has kind of a full few days to be able to review things ahead of the agenda. That is my only change to our agenda. We start with commissioner comments, and I do have some comments. If you guys are cool with it, I would like to relate that yesterday was the first meeting of the Orphan Wells Mitigation Enterprise Board. The Colorado Department of Natural Resources Orphan Wells Mitigation Enterprise Board, which was created by Senate Bill 22-198 to develop an industry-funded enterprise to clean up orphan wells and gas well sites and wells, held its first meeting yesterday. I provided an overview of the duties of the enterprise board. The statute states that the purposes of the Orphan Wells Mitigation Enterprise are as follows: imposing and collecting mitigation fees, funding the plugging, reclaiming, and remediating of orphan wells in the state, ensuring that the cost associated with plugging, reclaiming, and remediating orphan wells are borne by operators in the form of mitigation fees, and determining the amount of mitigation fees. The board is required to meet at least once annually and to determine if the fee amount collected from operators to fund the enterprise should be adjusted. If the board chooses to have a fee adjustment, it would then require a hearing to be conducted as a rulemaking under the Colorado Administrative Procedures Act. At our meeting yesterday, we received information and a report from Dave Andrews, the Orphan Wells manager, concerning the current status of the Orphan Wells funding, as well as the work that was being done by the Orphan Wells team. And following that report, the board determined that no action needed to be taken this year, and we determined to leave the statutory fees of $125 and $225 in place for the next fee assessment, which is April 30th. The board would then receive a report from Mr. Andrews and the director on September 1st of 2023. That report is mandated by executive order to be done yearly on September 1st. Following receipt of that report, the enterprise board would hold its annual meeting, probably toward the latter part of September of 2023, and make a determination of whether a fee adjustment is warranted at that time. It was nice to see everybody on the Orphan Wells Enterprise Board yesterday. Christopher Simmons is the reclamation seat. Kim Mendoza Cook is the industry seat. Lynn Baca, Adams County Commissioner, is the local government seat. I serve as its chair and as a statutorily appointed member to the board, and Director Julie Murphy serves as a statutorily appointed member of the board. The other three board members who were appointed by Governor Polis will need to be confirmed by the Senate when it convenes next year. So that's the report of the Orphan Wells Enterprise Mitigation Board. If you guys have any questions, happy to answer them. Otherwise, we are setting out a press release sort of identifying that action or inaction of the board yesterday. With that, does any other commissioner have questions or comments? Commissioner Messner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Great report on the enterprise board. That's exciting to hear. I just wanted to let the other commissioners know that I did have an opportunity to present in front of a CCI conference yesterday. Colorado Counties Inc., which is the county advocacy organization, met both with the Western District and the Front Range District and presented them with an update on the full slate of rulemakings that we've gone through over the last couple of years, as well as the current state of permitting. So that went really well. Lots of good feedback, lots of supportive commissioners out there for the work that we're doing. So I thought that was really well received. So.
That's fantastic. And good to hear the good reception from CCI and its members. And thanks for doing that, Commissioner Messner. It's a fantastic part of your job. Other commissioners with questions? All right, seeing none, we will move to consent agenda. As I mentioned, there are 3 whiting spacing matters, 1 PDC exception location, and there is 1 hearing officer recommendation. Are there any questions concerning consent? Seeing none, do we have a motion to approve consent?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve consent agenda. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Moving onward into our agenda, we will take up docket number 2205-00101. This is an oil and gas development plan for Karis Piance LLC. And I believe we need to get Mr. Joe Prajala as well as his panel onto the panel.
Good morning. Let's see. And I see my participants here from Karis. So I think we are ready to go.
And Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, Ms. Trask and a member of her team, Mr. Cabesco, did have a few comments that they'd like to make regarding the director's recommendation, a few updates. So if you'd like to take that now or wait for the presentation from Karis, we could do it that way.
I'm fine to take it up now. I see Ms. Trask has visualized herself. Mr. Prashalla, are you comfortable with that?
Yes, I am, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair Robbins. I was wondering if Mr. Cabesco is available. I see him on the panel. I do believe that he has a new computer and might have some minor technical issues.
Let's give him a second to figure out a new state computer.
I think maybe I'll just jump in. Oh, he says he can't unmute.
Hearings Manager Larson, can you unmute him?
Mr. Cabesco, you are unmuted. So if you would like to try speaking, even if you can't access video, we should be able to hear you.
I think I'll just go ahead. Apologies for the technical glitches. Sometimes our new laptops aren't quite adjusted to what we need them to be just yet. So I just wanted to take a minute, and I appreciate the time to do so. With concurrence from the applicant Karis, staff did make a few corrections to the application after we published the director's recommendation. I would just like to take a moment to walk through some of those corrections on the record today. So the following corrections have been made to the Form 2A itself. The COGCC plugging and reclamation bond information was removed and was replaced with the federal plugging and reclamation bond information. The COGCC gas gathering bond information was also removed, as there are no gas processing facilities proposed on this location. And then a couple additional corrections in the director's recommendation. I'm not sure if you have that before you, but I'll walk through those couple of changes. On page 6 of the director's recommendation, staff discussed a condition of approval that we had initially applied to the application. This condition of approval was asking for increased financial assurance. However, we did determine that the new financial assurance process per the 700 series rules will accommodate financial assurance differently from how we've done it in the past. So we would like to remove this COA. So per the new rules, the financial assurance requirements will be assessed on an annual basis, and any adjustments required will be determined at that time. So staff has removed this condition of approval from the Form 2A. We've had discussions both with our deputy director about it and with Karis about it, and we're all in agreement that the removal of this condition of approval is appropriate at this time. And then on the director's recommendation at the bottom of page 8, there is a list of wildlife BMPs and timing steps. The second to the last bulleted item that in the director's recommendation reads as big game, no construction, drilling completions, interim final rec, CPW between April 15th to July 1st. That is incorrect. The correct BMP would read, if new oil and gas construction must occur within CPW mapped elk production areas, the operator agrees to conduct new oil and gas construction outside the time periods from May 15th through June 30th. That BMP is accurate and correct on the Form 2A and was agreed to by both CPW and Karis. So those are the corrections we'd like to make for the record. And again, we have worked this out with the applicant, and I believe that it is the right approach here on this application.
Okay, so taking them in reverse order, switch the second to last wildlife step on page 8 to the one you just read into the record.
Correct.
And then remove the COA concerning financial assurances. And the rationale for that is our new financial assurance regime requires a yearly update irregardless. And so there's not a need to put something specific in a OGDP director's rec.
That is correct.
Okay, any questions from commissioners about those two changes? And then the other stuff is not necessarily a COA change, the bond, et cetera. It just, it is what it is.
That's correct. It's the surety ID number was changed to the federal number.
Okay, Commissioner Cross.
Thank you. And just to confirm, you said that was May 15th, not May 1st to June 30th?
May 15th through June 30th. And that's actually a BMP that Colorado Parks and Wildlife has previously established. And that is built into our Form 2A as one of the wildlife BMP drop downs within the form. So we are using that standardized language here.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I think you're muted.
Other questions for Ms. Trask? All right, seeing none, thank you very much for the update. We do appreciate it. And maybe stick around if we have other questions. Otherwise, we will now recognize Mr. Pershala and Ms. Hull.
Great. Well, good morning, Mr. Chair and commissioners. Director Murphy and staff, and thank you, Ms. Trask, for clarifying those items on the director recommendation. My name is Joe Pershala with Wellborn, Sullivan, Meck, and Tooley, and I represent Karis Piance LLC. And I'm pleased to present the Extended Liberty Unit A18-495 Oil and Gas Development Plan today. With me today are Holly Hill, Regulatory Manager, who will be presenting on behalf of Karis, and also available for Commissioner questions is Lindsay Ryder, EHS Manager for Karis. Karis's application requests the Commission approve an oil and gas development plan that covers approximately 723 acres within Township 4 South, Ranges 95 and 96 West in Rio Blanco County, Colorado. The application requests that the Commission approve one new oil and gas location, the ELU A18-495 pad, which is located within the mineral development area. The pad is designed to accommodate 35 new directional wells to develop and produce gas from the Williams Fork Formation. There is no spacing application associated with the development plan. Rather, Karis intends to develop the mineral development lands pursuant to the Piance Basin basin-wide density and setback order, order number 1-229. That order allows for one well per 10 acres in the Williams Fork Formation. Just to be clear, that the 35 wells would be drilled from just the one location. It would not be multiple locations. Karis owns leases from the Bureau of Land Management that cover the entirety of the application lands, and pursuant to those leases, Karis has obtained drilling permits from BLM to drill the 35 proposed wells from the ELU A18 pad. While the minerals are federal, the proposed location is on federal surface and it's in a rural rangeland area of Rio Blanco County. Karis has worked very closely with Colorado Parks and Wildlife regarding this location. The location does encounter COGCC designated high priority habitat, but through Karis's consultation with CPW granted a waiver pursuant to 304 B2B subpart 8. Further, Karis, in concert with CPW and the BLM, developed a wildlife management plan and compensatory wildlife mitigation plan to mitigate the impacts from the proposed operations. As a result of this work with CPW and the resulting waiver, the location does not meet any of the criteria under 304 B2B, and an alternative location analysis was not required. Rio Blanco County is the relevant local government. However, it does not have siting regulations. That said, Karis will submit for a county permit prior to construction of this location. There are no proximate local governments. Karis has requested a variance pursuant to Rule 406E4 to extend from 6 months to 12 months the time period between setting conductor casing and commencing drilling operations or performing interim reclamation. That variance request was attached to the application as an exhibit. The director recommendation does address it and does recommend approval of the variance along with this application. Karis has given proper notice pursuant to Rule 504A and 303E1 to all parties entitled to notice, and no petitions or requests for party status were received. On December 9th, 2022, the director issued her recommendation, which does recommend approval of the OGDP, including the variance to Rule 406E4. With that, Karis maintains that the application satisfies the Conservation Act and Commission rules and respectfully requests that the Commission adopt the director recommendation and approve the application. Thank you for your time this morning, and I will pass the baton to Ms. Hill, who will provide more specifics on the development plan, Karis's work with CPW and BLM, and the location.
Ms. Hill.
Good morning. Let me just get my presentation up. This is always an interesting part for me. Okay, hopefully you can see the slide deck.
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. Oh, here we go. Okay. Hopefully it's up now.
Yep, it's up.
Great. Well, thank you, Chair Robbins, commissioners, and COGCC staff. We greatly appreciate Ms. Trask updating you all on some of the elements that unfolded recently. I think Karis has a great understanding now going forward for submitting these applications, and Ms. Trask was very instrumental in that. I'm Holly Hill. I'm the regulatory manager at CARIS. We are one of the largest natural gas operators on the West Slope, supplying natural gas to the Western market. Today, we're here to talk about our expanded Liberty Unit A18-495 OGDP. So let me get to the next slide. This is our OGDP overview. So there's a lot going on this map. So I'm going to walk you through what we're showing here. So as you can see, we have the ELU A18-495 location situated in the northwest of section 18, 4 South 95 West. You're also going to notice we have several other locations plotted on here because this whole area was planned out in a onsite that occurred in June of 2020 because the BLM prefers that we cluster our locations to provide for a full NEPA review of a larger development plan. So this ELU 818 will be the pad where we drill the wells. The production will be processed here at this G13-496 CDP. Production from our approved O13-496 and our yet to be submitted M12-496 will also be processed at this G13. Gas will then head all the way south to our Story Gulch compressor, and our water, produced water, will head to our Divide Road water treatment facility for recycling and future use and future operations. These are the ALA criteria overview for 304 little b2 big B. As you'll notice, we are in high priority habitat. We did not obtain a waiver to consult for high priority habitat, but as Mr. Pershala said, we did obtain support from CPW for a waiver on the alternative location analysis, which I will get into in a second. The expanded Liberty Unit federal location is situated 23 miles north of the town of Parachute in Rio Blanco County on rangeland. Rio Blanco does not have any oil and gas siting regulations, meaning they don't have any regulations determining where operators situate locations. We will secure an oil and gas well pad special use building permit through Rio Blanco, which requires a per well fee prior to constructing the well pad. And we typically don't enter into this fee status or the fee permit with Rio Blanco until we're closer to actually developing those wells. The minerals developed from the ELU A18-495 OGDP will be operated from fee surface, accessing federal minerals that are committed to the expanded Liberty Unit. We did receive BLM APD approval for these wells in December of 2020, and in July of this year, we received APD extensions for an additional 2 years, putting the expirations for all wells to December 8th, 2024. We submitted our OGDP application prior to receiving and submitting those requests for extension, so I did want to notate that. The White River Field Office conducted a NEPA assessment for this location as well as the other locations I pointed out on that OGDP development map. A NEPA evaluation is typically good for 5 years without needing any sort of further assessment or amendments. CARIS is obligated to continue drilling in the expanded Liberty Unit every 18 months to hold those leases. CARIS also remitted a bond in the amount of $359,580 for the plugging and reclamation costs to the BLM. And here you can see the project components, what the acreage will be once they're built, during interim reclamation, and then finally final reclamation, indicating that no disturbance will remain unless the surface owner wishes to keep that road. Okay, here's quite a busy slide diving into the timing stipulations and development planning for the ELU 818. So as you can see on that top bar here, we've got the expirations indicated as December of 2024, and then a list of the wildlife stipulations that we encounter with this plan. We've got the BLM wildlife or the BLM winter range timing limitation for big game, where no construction, drilling, and completion and intense maintenance is allowed. You'll notice there's that little red indicator, which I'll get into in a minute. BLM also has a greater sage grouse timing limitation from March 1st to July 15th for no construction and drilling and completions. Additionally, BLM has a raptor timing limitation from February 1st to August 31st for active nests in the area. CPW has similar timing stipulations for sage grouse and big game, and you'll notice that elk production, no construction period from May 15th to June 30th. So diving into that little red insignia, BLM is able to grant exceptions to these timing limitations for continuous development for drilling and completions, which is laid out in their 2015 resource management plan that has been amended. The BLM typically will not approve these exception requests at the submittal of APDs because they want to take the assessment and request closer to the time that the operator is planning to develop to have real-time information regarding the wildlife. All of the assessments that they have to endeavor are laid out in this 2015 RMP, and my colleague Lindsay Ryder is an expert on this, so she can answer any further questions on that. Going back to our schedule, we plan to set conductors and endeavor civil construction in September of 2023. This is typically when Caris builds pad locations because the soil is the most suitable. After that, mechanical pipe install will occur on the pad. So that's all the on-location flow lines, getting the facilities ready to go. And then we plan to come in and drill and complete during simultaneous operations. So we'll drill a batch of wells, complete those, drill another batch of wells, complete those. And that will occur for about 18 months, starting July 15th of 2024. Caris will be seeking an exception for these, any sort of extended civil construction that might need to occur, the mechanical pipeline installs that might need to occur, and the drilling, the continuous drilling and completions that will occur from BLM. Typically, when we seek those exceptions, if BLM agrees to that, if they believe that the wildlife would not be severely impacted, we will take that approval, submit it to CPW for their support. And if they support that, we submit all of this documentation via Form 4 to COGCC to modify the BMPs. We also conduct several meetings throughout the year with BLM to keep them updated as to our plans of development. And we intend to hold those meetings quarterly with CPW, BLM, and COGCC going forward. Okay. As you heard, Caris entered into a wildlife management plan. And we want to really point out here that avoidance is the cornerstone of what we've done here in this in the expanded Liberty unit. That way we can avoid some of the habitat that's sensitive and plan out production going forward. So in the expanded Liberty unit development process, we agreed to completely avoid Barnes Ridge. This is a key area for several sage-grouse leks. And we've located the ELU development east of that Barnes Ridge, which allows us a greater distance of 1 mile from existing leks, and the natural terrain, there's tons of valleys and ridges here, will help separate those lek sites as well for noise. We've entered into several additional best management practices to further minimize our indirect impacts, and that wildlife management plan and compensatory mitigation plan will apply to future development in that area. So for instance, that ELU M12 that we're getting ready to submit. Several of our best management practices address traffic management, drilling technologies, greenhouse gas emissions management, water quality management, and habitat and wildlife management. We also developed a compensatory mitigation plan in coordination with CPW and BLM for this area. We had developed a plan to mitigate the direct and indirect impacts by implementing 196 acres of brush removal in adjacent high priority habitat for sage grouse, elk, and mule deer. And we conducted this brush removal on our surface. The removal of the 196 acres involved hydroax treatment of mature surface berry gamble oak stands. and that will expand existing breeding, brood rearing habitat and increase native boar composition and reduce corvid perches. When we actually got to looking at this area, when we initially planned on this, this was going to be 196 acres from the mapping view. And when we actually proceeded with the plan, it ended up being about 218 acres of brush removal. So as you can see in that picture in 2021 to that picture in 2022, we've conducted this mitigation plan. The brush removal has occurred. We did this ahead of time in advance to seeking this permit. And we have agreed that no development will occur in this area for the life of the project. We'll continue weed management and annual monitoring. The BLM assessed this in their NEPA review, so this was discussed at the on-sites in June of 2020. This is a list of some of the BMPs we are employing. Again, as I said, site selection, the cornerstone of what we do is selecting locations that avoid the sensitive areas for wildlife. We also co-locate most of our disturbance, so the access roads and pipelines will be together. That way it reduces surface disturbance. We do not use any oil-based mud or proppant in our development. We recycle our produced water and reuse it. And we have a 3-phase infrastructure, which was that G13 496 CDP, where we process all of the liquids to reduce further disturbance. We also will employ an adaptive weed management plan that was the result of collaboration with CPW and BLM upon reclamation, as well as interim reclamation. This is a snapshot of the consultation process. This is by no means the entire consultation process. It's just the key components we've pulled out. I want to draw your attention to that June 2020 infield onsites. All of the agencies were available and present at that onsite, and that's really where the beginning of the discussions for the compensatory mitigation and wildlife management plan began. And finally, CARES is seeking a waiver for the alternative location analysis because the location was pre-vetted at that onsite in June of 2020, and because it's been assessed in the White River Field Office's BLM NEPA process that occurred in November of 2020. We also acquired CPW's letter of support for that waiver. We're requesting an exception to Rule 1202C1S, that's for the sport fish management, as allowed by Rule 309 little e 5 big D2. CPW provided a letter of support, further elaborating on BMPs that CARES will commit to in that area. And finally, we are requesting a Rule 502B variance for those conductors to remain on the surface longer than 6 months due to the federal and CPW timing stipulations. That concludes my presentation, and I would like to open it up to any questions you have for me and my colleague, Lindsay Ryder.
Great. And if you want to stop the screen share, we'll be able to see everybody a little bit better.
There you go.
Ms. Hill, the 196 acres that was hydro, whatever, is that BLM land?
No, that's CARES owned surface.
Okay. I knew you guys owned a lot of the surface, and so I wasn't sure. So thank you for that clarification. It seems like you've done a pretty fair job of moving through both kind of BLM and wildlife as well as CPW and wildlife. Is that fair? It looks like that was a lot of work to sort of navigate through the various components of the two regulatory structures.
Yes, and I would say that's very typical. So even pre-COGCC rulemaking, that is what CARES has had to do to come to a development plan with both agencies. So we've always consulted. This just shows the different stage gates that we've endeavored for this.
Great. Well, I applaud you for the effort there. That working where you're working, there are significant wildlife considerations, but at first blush, it looks like you've done a good job of trying to navigate both regulatory entities regulations. We might elevate someone from CPW at some point if there are questions for CPW. So if I could have Hearings Manager Larson go ahead and bring on our CPW official. I'm seeing nods from some of my commissioners that they'd like to talk with him. With that, questions for Mr. Prashala or Ms. Hill initially? Commissioner McGowan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Hill, for your presentation today. It would help to see kind of visually, especially the Gantt chart, because it was confusing all the timing stipulations. I'm wondering if you could explain to me a little bit more. I think what I'm hearing is an anticipated request to maybe go outside the timing stipulation for drilling and completions to finish completions, and is that, what are the trade-offs for asking for that, that I don't know if it's a waiver or what it would be versus stopping and coming back? And I'm wondering if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yes, absolutely. I will take a dive at that, and then perhaps Lindsay, my colleague, can help answer as well. So BLM typically prefers that we drill and complete in one occupation. So they're not very interested in us coming back and reoccupying that location. That causes further disturbance and impacts to the wildlife. So that's why CARIS conducts simultaneous operations. So we're completing a batch of wells that we typically drill 4 wells, and we come in and complete them. And we're going through that well process to get in there and get out to reduce our impacts to that wildlife in the area.
Okay, and then I assume that would all, I think what you said too, would that require also approval from our CPW folks?
Yes, yes. So typically what we do is closer to the time of development or construction, we will seek an exception from BLM for their timing stipulations. And again, they've been given a window into what our operations look like, because we do sit with them and give them a snapshot of our development. We plan to bring CPW typically involved in those meetings, and now we plan to fold COGCC into that as well. So we would obtain those exceptions if they approve it. They might not. They have different prescriptions to apply to that area based on that RMP. And if they approve that, we submit that to CPW requesting a letter of support. And if they support that, we would submit a Form 4 to COGCC requesting a modification of the BMPs for wildlife.
Okay. Thank you. The other question I had that I think you kind of got at, and it was a question I submitted, sorry, it was submitted yesterday. I'm trying to understand the compensatory mitigation that you've done ahead of time and I'll use in quotes getting credits for. And I'm going to assume that's that 196 acres of compensatory mitigation. Does that apply just to this OGD application, or will it apply to several other future ones? Is it that entire mitigation wildlife plan that you have put together? And I'm wondering if you could talk about that a little more and how we will be seeing that in the future.
Yeah, and I see Lindsay's shown up. She is the best person to address that, so I'll let her answer that.
Thank you. Yeah, the compensatory mitigation applies to the A18, the M12, and the G13. Specifically, the mitigation that we did in the brush removal addresses the direct and indirect impacts of those 3 locations.
Okay, and sorry to sound ignorant here. How many of those are already approved? How many will we be seeing?
You have not approved the M12. Holly, correct me on the G13. Has that 2A been approved?
Yes. So of that area, we've got the G13 approved, the O13, the A18, and then we've yet to submit that M12. And okay, we're allowed to amend this wildlife management plan in the instance that we wanted to add another location out there. So that's something that we have the availability to do if CPW agrees to it.
So could we kind of think of your wildlife mitigation plan as I don't know, like a mini cap that you've kind of worked through with CPW and BLM? Like, you have this area, you said, this is my plan, this is where things are going to happen. And you've worked with BLM and CPW to kind of work what that's going to look like. Because it's multiple.
I think so.
Yeah. I'm not sure that I am understanding part of your presentation that said, I think in order to hold your lease with BLM, you have to show continual drilling every 18 months or, and so if this is going to take you through to 2024, but does that hold your lease through 2024? It doesn't mean that every 18 months you have to submit an OGDP application to us, correct?
So the unit agreement that we have with the BLM requires that we spud 4 wells every 18 months. So we will be okay with holding those leases because we'll be drilling our ELU 013 shortly. And then within 18 months, we'll need to spud, or no later than 18 months, we'll need to spud those wells on the A18. So this is a agreement we've made with the White River Field Office and the state BLM to continually develop. They don't want to grant you a unit and you drill 1 well and don't do anything else. So you have to keep proving that you're interested in developing that area.
And how does that, so it was also interesting to me because I was not aware. I think it was your environmental assessment and then your permits with BLM that had expired, but that you can ask for a 2-year extension. Can you ask for another 2-year extension, or do you have to then do another kind of EA assessment and then the cycle starts over?
Yes, so BLM has the discretion to grant 2-year extensions if the operator requests it. They don't have to give you 2 years. We did seek 2 years. We were able to explain what we were going to be doing in this development area. But once you've exhausted basically those 4 years, you get 2 years at first APD initiation, and then you can request up to 2 years. You would have to basically refile APDs again and most likely endeavor another NEPA review because BLM considers NEPA valid for 5 years.
Okay, that's super helpful. So last question, is the compensatory mitigation or the wildlife plan that we have with CPW, is that, we keep using this word in hearings, so I'm not sure people appreciate it. Is that an evergreen document that, does it have an expiration date? Does it get updated as you or CPW see different kind of wildlife situations? Does it get reflected in that plan?
Lindsay?
Yes, so the document, the wildlife management plan is, we agree to a three-year term. But we do meet with CPW annually to review our development, our mitigation projects, and we do update it on an annual basis if needed. But the agreement will be reviewed and signed again in 3 years.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the information.
Commissioner Messner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation and the application. Lots of information. I did have a couple of questions, and I'll ask Mr. Elm as well some of these questions, but just so I make sure I understand the proposed operation schedule here. So as I was initially reading the application, I guess I had interpreted that the exception that was anticipated was going to be for completions. What I'm seeing from, I think, from the presentation is that there's actually some construction that also is going to be pushing into the timing steps as well. I mean, it seems like the whole operation is going to be pushing into the timing steps, not just completions. I mean, it leads me to wonder why we're even utilizing timing steps if we're just pushing through on all of these timing steps. And so I'm just trying to understand whether or not I'm right with that, or whether you could clarify exactly what is going into the proposed timing steps and kind of why, I guess, dive a little deeper into that.
Sure. So if you just take the BLM timing stipulations, we would really only have a 3 to 4 month window to do everything. And the BLM knows that's just not possible. And as an operator who wants to drill several wells off of one well pad, we're trying to construct our well pads in the windows where it's allowed and where the soil is the most suitable for that. And then get that construction and the conductor set, which is the point in time and the most impactful to wildlife. So construction they consider pretty invasive. So we like to do that outside of those timing stipulation windows. And likely what's going to occur after that is the on-pad maintenance. So that's the pipeline connections. That's typically viewed as less invasive to the wildlife species because you've already done all the moving of the dirt prior to. And then drilling and completions is considered, they'll allow that for continuous development because they do want you to get in and out. They don't want you to keep coming back, bringing that rig in and affecting the wildlife nearby. And Lindsay, Taylor, anything else I might have missed that you'd like to?
I would just like to add that we will do everything on the construction side to not go into those stipulation windows. We really do try to get all of our construction activity done before. There are just certain circumstances, unforeseen circumstances, weather, equipment, backlog on order, that might require us to be in that window for 5 to 10 days. We are constantly communicating with BLM and CPW when that occurs. We don't want to plan for that. We will know later. But for the drilling and completions, it is a 18-month process, I believe is what Holly showed in that Gantt chart. And yes, BLM does really promote, and they say this in their RMPA, that cluster development that will reduce the extent of seasonal range that are subject to the cumulative and chronic adverse behavioral effects of our development. So that they acknowledge it, and they want you to kind of get in, do your acute disturbance, and then leave the location so that we can get interim reclamation and that habitat restored as quick as possible.
Do the BLM STIPs and the CPW STIPs, CPW STIPs that are proposed BMPs within this application line up? So they're the same, CPW and BLM. So it's not just a BLM STIP that we're looking to develop exceptions on. It would actually be exceptions developed within the COGCC permit. And I also assume that there are certain species, sage grouse, raptors, that are going to be more susceptible to construction activities, even completion or drilling activities within those timing STIPs than perhaps some sort of stipulation for, migratory corridors or big game, severe winter range or something like that. And so as I understand it, there are some raptor considerations on this and certainly some sage grouse considerations. Are you able to conduct operations outside of those particular species that could be significantly impacted even with just 1 year of impact, so that it would not come back versus, maybe some of the other species that may be less susceptible to abandoning particular locations after one season worth of impact?
I can try to answer that, Commissioner. So where the A18 is located, we are in sage grouse habitat, but we're on the outer skirts of it. Some will consider it, we talk about occupied habitat versus just general habitat. The 18 is in an area that's not necessarily occupied habitat. Like we mentioned, we're over a mile away from Barnes Ridge, where there are several active leks, but we do have those natural terrain features separating us. We've also agreed to, installing earthen walls or straw bale barriers for any site or noise if needed. Where the 18 is located is those natural terrain features are actually shielding the location from any of those leks on the other side of the ridge. We did do the compensatory mitigation. We, as you've heard, we consulted with CPW biologists and BLM's biologists and sage grouse biologists in both agencies to ensure that the compensatory mitigation would offset those indirect and direct impacts from this location. The mitigation project that we employed was done in sage grouse habitat, but not necessarily that occupied habitat. And we specifically chose that area to promote sage grouse moving into an area that they wouldn't normally be in. So we hope that those mitigation efforts would, give the agencies the information they need to approve the timing limitations for that year-round drilling and completions activity.
And if I may, for the raptor nest, Commissioner Messner, we conduct bird surveys prior to conducting any construction. So we'll know if there's a raptor nest out there. We'll be in communication with BLM and CPW if there is. We've conducted surveys recently and there are no raptor nests in that area. So we stay on top of that with our own biological surveys as well.
Okay, thanks for that. Mr. Elm, I wonder if you would just give us an overview of kind of CPW's perspective and on the different timing steps that CPW has proposed, and you know, how you came to the conclusion for you know, waiving the alternative location analysis, and you know, what your thoughts are on this potential exceptions to the timing steps for operations that are being proposed here.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you, Commissioner Messner. For the record, my name is Taylor Elm. I'm the Northwest Energy Liaison for Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and conducted the CPW consultation with CARES for this location. You know, I guess going to the timing steps and kind of how we may kind of weight those, for lack of a better term. In my opinion, I do think you're right. I think there are some species like raptors and grouse that we would consider a little bit more sensitive with the timing concerns. You know, raptor nests, obviously they can't move, so there's an issue there, and some similarities with grouse and what they have available compared to big game. You have a little more room to be displaced up in that area, and so I think you do see from the chart that Mrs. Hill showed, at least for that construction activity that we kind of consider the most impactful, as best as possible. They kind of tried to thread the needle there in that fall window where it's going to be less impactful to grouse and raptors. As far as the allowances for the drilling and completions going year round, as Mrs. Hill described, CPW's stance historically has been similar to BLM's in that once activity has started, oftentimes it's better to continue those operations, even if you're going through that sensitive time period, rather than mobilizing, you know, the rig offsite, coming back in, at least doing that once on a location like this, potentially more than just one of those occupations. So, you know, that's a factor that weighs into it. The other factor was the additional compensatory mitigation piece, really to try and get towards offsetting those anticipated impacts. We know that there will be likely some impacts to grouse and those species by going into those periods. And so how do we utilize that option to do the compensatory mitigation to offset those adequately, to where at the end of the day, we feel like we're kind of at levels where we have no net gain and impacts, if you will. And speaking about that, for the BLM side of things, for sage grouse in particular, one thing in the sage grouse resource management plan for BLM, it stipulates that for them to approve these decisions, it does have to result in net conservation gain, which essentially, you know, the only way to get there is through some kind of mitigation or habitat enhancement work. And so that was kind of part of their analysis too, and part of the mitigation requirement. And at the end of the day, their assessment of the mitigation that was done was that the project would result in a net conservation gain for greater sage grouse. So it was just kind of another layer, I guess, that kind of went into that decision, and that factors into it, if you will.
Thank you, Mr. Elm. That was super helpful. I appreciate that. I assume that in determining compensatory mitigation and analyzing the previous project that was done is being used as mitigation for this OGDP application, that the monetary calculations were all done as far as the amount spent on that project and the amount that is being anticipated for this particular OGDP and future OGDPs for that matter, and it all matches up. Okay.
You know, that's a good question. I think from conversations that I've had with CARES staff, they are able to gain some monetary value by being able to do their own mitigation work by utilizing, you know, equipment to do the mitigation work that's kind of already up there. So I think there is some value there for that. But that being said, that for CPW to treat that same amount of acreage by using a third-party contractor and kind of going through our fiscal process, I'm not sure. Well, I can surely say we would not have been able to treat the same number of acres likely for the same cost. So we didn't necessarily look at it strictly from the monetary perspective. It was kind of more of habit or acres of habitat impacted versus acres of habitat treated, if that helps.
Okay, no, that makes sense. Thank you, Mr. Elm. Appreciate your responses, and Mr. Chair, I don't have any further questions at this point.
Great. Thank you both for the good questions. Commissioner Cross has questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I just want to ask a couple questions about the overall plan that you're doing. Can you just provide a little bit more detail about when as Commissioner McGowan said, this is sort of like a cap, but you're doing this with the federal lands. BLM is wanting you to kind of look at that programmatic design plan. Can you give us a little bit more detail on when that design started happening, how locations were chosen for this, and if those locations changed over time?
Sure. So typically geology gets really excited about a certain area. And so they'll start targeting where they want to explore those minerals. And they'll put those on maps, and we'll kind of vet them through some of the mapping layers to see if any of those locations are viable based on the reach of the rig. And once we kind of establish an area that we know aren't going to interfere with NSO layers, we will have boots go out on the ground, our own field folks, to kind of check things out to see that we can situationally construct a CDP, a well pad, the access roads make sense. Do we have pipeline infrastructure? If not, how long will it be to build that and get that implemented? And once we've got a good idea of the layout, that's when we'd get the agencies involved, that we know we've got well pads that aren't going to cause any issues. So there probably were several iterations on maps that we looked at that didn't pass the NSO marks, that we just thought were not going to make any sense. Like we said, we try to avoid that Barnes Ridge. That was something we knew we needed to avoid because of all the leks. So once we've got a location we think is going to meet the criteria of the agencies, that's when we schedule those on-sites. And they're a relatively large endeavor. Several agencies out there, a lot of our construction crew, our engineers, regulatories out there. We've got the surface owner if they're involved, surface land. So it's a big group of folks out there checking the ground. So everyone kind of has their own lens. The BLM brings out their wildlife biologists. They have their natural resource specialist. CPW's there as well with their lens, looking at the locations. And that's where we really discuss, will this location work? Does this access road make sense? And then that's where the ideas kind of formulate for what the compensatory mitigation could look like or what the wildlife offsets could be. Those are really when the crucial discussions start happening. Then we go back to our desks and start working on those final survey plats and coming up with those plans. And several consultation visits happen during that time frame, right, to get on the same page. We also put together a light mitigation plan and noise mitigation plan for this area as well, included CPW in that additionally when we were putting those plans together. And the BLM does like us to kind of put together a comprehensive plan for a large area so they can run their NEPA for that large area. That helps out with their assessment, folding into the RMP that they have to take a look at. They can look at emissions, they can look at surface impacts. And so that's kind of advantageous to us as an operator because that's what we're planning on doing going forward is kind of clustered development as we move to certain areas of the field that we're interested in. So it's a very elaborate process, but I would say it's always been a lot of consultation with CPW and BLM, and COGCC has been involved in site selection as well.
I appreciate that detail. And for those that haven't really worked with some of the federal issues, the NSO that you're talking about is no surface occupancy as determined by the White River Field Office Resource Management Plan, correct?
That's correct. Yep. And now we are looking at those COGCC NSO layers as well in future planning.
Okay, perfect. And can you give us an idea of how many no surface occupancy layers there kind of are in that area?
Lindsay, you've got the best eyes on that.
Yeah, I mean, the primary are our LECs, right? Our 1 mile NSO around an active LEC. That is our primary. Occasionally we will have an active raptor nest where we're located in this development. We don't have any golden eagles or bald eagles. Those would be strict NSO as well. Other than that, we have restricted use, but not NSO.
Okay, so most of the land here, it's no surface occupancy because of receptors. It's not no surface occupancy because BLM determined at the resource management plan stage that this should not be an area for oil and gas development, correct? Okay. So and you mentioned that there had been NEPA evaluation done by the White River Field Office. Can you tell us a little bit about what alternatives were considered under the NEPA analysis done?
Yes, Lindsay, do you have that up? I'd have to go and look at the NEPA.
I do have it up. Would you
Lindsay's
like me to pull it up? The alternative B, no action alternative, was discussed. But that was really all that was in the EA.
Okay, so just the no action and the proposed action. Okay. One other thing that you mentioned was that there was no active raptor nests as you went there. Was there any indication, and Mr. Elm, this may be more appropriate for you, was there any indication of prior raptor nests that are just out of use currently, or just nothing was found?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Grass. I would have to defer also to Mrs. Ryder on this, as I don't have their consultants raptor survey up right now and can't remember off the top of my head. I do know in the general area, we've certainly had raptor nesting activity in that general area, so it would not surprise me, but Lindsay, I can't remember from the survey results exactly what was found off the top of my head.
Yeah, we do have red-tailed hawk nests in the area. Those species tend to like this area. But in last year's raptor survey, we didn't have any occupied or active nests in the buffer zone around the A18. But we will continue to do those nest surveys every year, and especially before construction.
Okay, perfect. And then Mr. Elm, you also mentioned that NEPA now requiring the net conservation gain. In your opinion, is there a net conservation gain with this, with the compensatory mitigation that's being done here?
Yeah, good question. So that is specific to BLM's Greater Sage Grouse Resource Management Plan Amendment. It's it's a tricky thing to try and determine, and I think something that the BLM grapples with a little bit of what you need to get to that point. But yes, from CPW's standpoint, and with working with the BLM kind of as a referral agency on that EA development and through the NEPA process, we did agree with that. At the end of the day, it met that standard for that conservation gain.
And are there additional, whether they be with credits or anything else, or additional projects, do you think there's additional mitigation that could be done to help in this area, especially with relation to sage grouse?
Yeah, I think, going forward with whatever the development proposals may be, I do think there's additional acreage that lends itself to similar treatments that were done. We delineated some areas based on factors such as slope and existing vegetation. Also, kind of, as Mrs. Ryder mentioned, proximity to where grouse are currently using habitat. And so that certainly was not the only area that lended itself up there. I think we could delineate more of that. We've also talked with Paris about additional projects, and they do a suite of different things especially on their property, that are included in their overall wildlife mitigation plan. And they do kind of maintain a credit bank, if you will, that we've worked on that can be applied towards future things as needed, such as timing limitation relief and other instances that might arise where they kind of need to utilize those additional projects.
Wonderful. And Ms. Ryder, can you perhaps tell us more about the credit bank information that or work that's done by CARES?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, in consultation with CPW, when we went and put our wildlife management plan together, we looked at the whole CARES surface and our opportunities to implement habitat improvement projects. Those are all listed in the wildlife management plan that you guys received. And I can go over some of those, but some that we're really proud of. We have a very extensive grazing management plan where we analyze the vegetation where we have grazing allotments to make sure that the lessees are not overutilizing the area so that they're leaving enough forage for wildlife. Another example of one of our mitigation is just a water impoundment improvement. We've actually drilled and installed 2 water wells, allowing water to come up from subsurface to the surface for wildlife utilization. So those are just some examples. Again, they're all listed within our wildlife management plan, and we've worked with CPW to assign a credit value to each of those projects.
Perfect. And just one final question. Was there any other federal agencies that were involved in any of the on-site? Or was it just BLM and then the state agencies?
Yes, just BLM. There were no other federal agencies involved.
Okay, perfect. I think that's the only questions I have, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Messner.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just one more question that I forgot to ask. So for final reclamation, understanding that I mean, I think I heard you say that there may be some consideration from the landowner around perhaps access roads or paths or something like that. Do you know, can you anticipate or know now what that may be? And if so, was that, and this is a question for Mr. Elm, is that knowledge calculated in any kind of compensatory mitigation or consideration for wildlife if there's a known surface impact that intends to be left?
So I'll take a stab at that first, Commissioner Messner. The surface owners were involved in the siting of this location. They did not indicate to us they wanted us to leave anything on location. But given the fact that these wells will probably produce for 25 years, that may change. And I would think at that point, if they had any changes there, one, we would seek a variance from the commission and likely revise our wildlife management plan with CPW and involve both CPW and BLM in that revision. Mr. Elm?
Yeah, thank you, Holly. I think it's a good question. There's kind of some unknowns in play there. I think we're basing the mitigation on the best kind of crystal ball prediction from the operator of the life of that facility. We did not necessarily incorporate kind of an option for additionality if that access road remained in place. So in particular to that, no, I would say that kind of wasn't addressed, but certainly the project is meant to offset the full, as Holly mentioned, approximately 25 to 30 years of that location being in place.
No, and I appreciate that, and I understand you can't necessarily look 25 years in the future. I do see a challenge here because we do see variance requests for leaving access roads in place, but sometimes it's hard to understand what the CPW analysis was, when those operations were initially created to determine, should there be additional compensatory mitigation required at the variance stage, should an access road or a pad be left in place that wasn't calculated as part of the mitigation requirements. And so I wonder if the operator would be willing to have a just an acknowledgement of that on the 2A that indicates that should the I'm not sure exactly what the language should be, but should there be modifications to the final reclamation BMPs associated with the application, that you know, a consultation with CPW occur around compensatory mitigations prior to be included with the variance request or something like that. Is that something that the applicant would be okay with including in this application?
Absolutely. I see no issue with that.
Okay, thanks for that. Mr. Chair, that's the only question I had.
All right, very good. Further questions for the panel? All right, I'm seeing no further questions. Thank you all very much for the presentation today. It was very helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you, commissioners.
Okay, commissioners, we now are at the stage of our hearing in which we move to deliberations. Does any commissioner desire to start off with deliberations on this OGDP? Commissioner Cross, then Commissioner Messmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I feel like this is an interesting application. There's obviously a lot of wildlife concerns here. But I think, Mr. Chair, as you stated earlier, I think there has been a lot of work that has gone into it. Obviously, we don't get as much with the federal lands as we do with the DJ Basin here, but I think we did get a pretty good description of kind of the work that went into it, not just with CPW, but also with BLM and getting their biologists out there as well. You know, I do have some concerns about the fact that we are going to bleed into some of these timing steps, but I think we also have to look to not just our sister agencies, but BLM as well, and kind of look at the approach that they want to take with respect to the federal minerals, about kind of getting in there once and not having rigs in and out to get the disturbance done in one fell swoop. Looking at that Gantt chart, I'm hopeful that, you know, there's not just pure timing steps, but kind of the qualifiers on it, things like if there's active nests and things like that. I'm hopeful that we'll be able to check and we'll miss some of those active nests, so we can miss some of the raptors and the migratory bird timing steps in there. I think overall, you know, while there are some concerns here, I think that the application and the presentation has shown that the operator, COGCC, CPW, and BLM have put a lot of work into this to try and make sure that we do minimize and mitigate those adverse impacts to wildlife that are in this area. And, you know, not being a wildlife expert myself, I tend to think that we kind of have to look to what those agencies and those experts are saying here, and with their sign off, I'm comfortable with this application. I think it's approvable.
Thank you, Commissioner Cross. Commissioner Messner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, I think generally this has a lot of different wildlife considerations associated with it, and to me that's you know, an important consideration as far as how the applicant is anticipating handling these different situations. I do think that there's been clear communication between the applicant, CPW, and BLM on, you know, how to address the different wildlife issues. I do think that there are different species that need to be handled differently, and it's certainly not a one-size-fits-all type of situation here. So I think the continued communication between the applicant and CPW, you know, around each stage of the process, to me is going to be critical to ensuring that this is actually a protective operation. I do think you know, we have an obligation to first avoid as part of our regulatory process. And the way that we avoid in this particular situation most successfully is through timing stipulations, particularly during the construction phase of operations. And so to me, that construction phase bleeding into a timing stip would not be appropriate. However, the second piece that ties in there, kind of the on-site maintenance piece, I have less concern about, but the actual construction of the pad, the construction of the road, the laying of the pipelines up to the pad site, that kind of high impact construction, I do think needs to be within the, or outside of the timing stipulations that have been proposed. And then I think continual communication between CPW and the applicant for the next steps, as well as to COGCC, with the consideration to first avoid impacts. But generally, I think that this was a well-done application. I think there was a lot of work done and considerations for a number of different aspects. And so I do appreciate that. I do think that this, and I do appreciate the compensatory mitigation project that was done even previous to this. I think that's a good approach. I do think that, increasing the net habitat for sage grouse specifically in this one is certainly of benefit in that particular area. And so I think that makes sense how that is being handled. I think just careful calculations, around compensatory mitigation, should there be modifications to the final reclamation, it is an important concept for us to consider moving forward as well. Because as we see more variances come through that have access roads or pads left in place without understanding what CPW's perspective is on that, or what the COGCC's perspective was when those were permitted, it makes it hard to make a decision on those particular variance requests. So I think having language in there that would encourage an operator to consult with CPW and provide that as part of their variance, I think it would be helpful moving forward. So I do support the inclusion of that language. So I can be in support of this application. And those are my thoughts.
Thank you. I agree that this application is approvable. I think that before us is potentially well, let me hear from Commissioner McGowan first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with everything that my fellow commissioners have stated. I think for me, this has been the most complicated from a wildlife perspective. We have several different species with overlaying maps for, priority habitat. But I do think that we also have several overlaying plans with those who have expertise in those species that have been overlaid and mapped and consulted on. So I'm appreciative of kind of that big view, and something that I will say again almost feels like a mini cap. So CPW has worked with this operator to come up with a wildlife plan. They've done compensatory mitigation ahead of time. I think it's good to know that there is a net increase for sage grouse habitat, similar to what Commissioner Messner said. And so while it's complicated, and I think that all the commissioners here are concerned about making sure that we're trying to avoid first and foremost, and that would include these timing stipulations, and realizing that these windows are look like they're very small. I feel confident that CPW and BLM are consulting in an appropriate way. And this is where we miss Commissioner Ackerman. But I feel like I've heard enough today to be able to approve this application. Mr. Chair, you are muted.
Thank you. So I will cut to the chase and move to approve the OGDP with the language from Commissioner Messner concerning compensatory mitigation, as well as the removal of COA that was on page 6 of the director's report, and then the switch of the wildlife stipulation concerning big game that was read into the record by Ms. Trask earlier today.
Second.
AAG Mercer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to clarify whether your motion also includes those two more sort of administrative changes to the Form 2A that Ms. Trask discussed, which was the removal of the replacement of the correct financial assurance information and the removal of the gas facilities. That's not applicable here.
Sure. My motion is so corrected.
So seconded.
And Ms. Trask came and left, so she must be satisfied. Now she's back. Are you good, Ms. Trask?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, AAG Mercer. Appreciate it.
Very good. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, commissioners, that concludes the business on our agenda for today. I would note before we adjourn just a couple of points. This is the final hearing of the commission for this calendar year of 2022. We will next meet on January 4th of 2023. I would note for the record that the commission has now heard and approved 43 OGDPs and 3 caps for calendar year 2022. I would also note that the commission heard and denied 1 OGDP. I believe this is a very good accomplishment. I think it is reflective of the partnership we have with all of our stakeholders, our staff, operators, communities, and local governments, our sister agencies such as CPW and CDPHE, as well as our sister federal agency, the BLM. I want to thank everyone for their assistance in this. I think this shows that Colorado's mission change rules are working and that we are analyzing oil and gas development and ensuring that approved OGDPs and caps are protective of public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife resources. So just wanted to cap off the day with those points. Is there anything further? Seeing none, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Several motions and several seconds to adjourn the last meeting of the Colorado Oil and Gas Commission for 2022. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Great. Take care, everybody. Have happy holidays, and we'll see you next year.